Hello and welcome to another episode of God-Sized Stories. I'm very blessed. I have C.W. Allen joining us today. C.W., tell us about yourself.
CW Allen's my government name, and I am a hip hop artist, an author, a worker at a ministry on the South Side of Chicago called Sunshine Gospel, a father of two, and a husband of a beautiful bride. And just I love people and figure things out as I go.
Absolutely. That's always life, isn't it? Just figure it out as things come along. I'm curious, before we get, so audience, today we're blessed, we're going to hear CW's testimony of how he became a believer. But I want to ask a different question, because like I heard you reference you do hip hop and you're an author. What do you write? Because I love to read. I know a lot of my listeners love to read. What type of things do you write?
You know, it's funny. I never had any inclination that I would be a author of any sort. I think, as I started writing songs, I realized that I enjoy writing, and I did when I was younger. I just didn't pay that much attention to it. And I ended up right before the pandemic writing my story. It's called
Oh,
Catalyst. And so the book is I called it Catalyst because it's the moments that changes the most, like catalytic moments. And so I share about different moments in my life that changed me and what are some of the implications of what God has taught me through that. So it's a pretty, I think it's a pretty enjoyable read. A lot of storytelling. That's what I naturally do as a person. And so a lot of color in that way. So it's been fun. I've enjoyed it. I got a few ideas in my head, but we'll see if they ever come to fruition. Writing a book is like a marathon. So it's a
well, I get the feeling then we're in for a real treat today. Then, so it's like, especially if you're talking about being a storyteller and stuff like that. That's my heart, is listening to storytellers and sharing their life and their stories through that. So I'm excited to hear your testimony today. So I'm just gonna let you start wherever you want to start with that.
Yeah, thanks for having me and allowing me to share. My story starts in Cleveland, Ohio in 1986. I was born to my mother, Shirley Allen, and my dad, C.W. Allen. And, when I was born, my dad told my mom, she initially wanted to name me Robert, which is my younger brother's name. And he said, no, this is my little dub. And he, as I grew older, he told me, I always wondered, like worried that people would, like make fun of your name or ask you what it stand for too much. So I was kind of hesitant, but he was like, when I saw you, I knew you were my little dub, which is
Oh,
like my nickname. So, I was with my parents. They were together until I was about 6, but my mom and dad were both functioning drug addicts when I was little. And, my mom's extremely open about that now. She's been sober for roughly about 28 years in AA, knows the Lord's amazing woman. And my dad got clean as well. So, I think that me sharing those parts of my story, even in my book, were okay. Like I was able to honor my parents and kind of
ooh.
ride that line well. But my mom told me she remembers when I was 2, we were going to Virginia to visit family, and her and my dad got so high they just circled the city for hours. Like they didn't realize that they never got on the interstate and just were so high they were just going
Yes.
in circles. But like that was, like that was the temperature of me as a kid. And it was just it was second nature. She said one time she went to buy drugs, and I was in the back seat, and I looked at her and I said, we're not supposed to be here. And she said I was probably about 4, and it freaked her out. I don't even know. I don't even remember that moment. I'm like, it must have been like one of those God take the donkey moments. But no, so my mom and dad split. We went to go live with my grandmother, my mom's mother, and my dad lived with his mother, which was around the corner pretty much, not too far. But, as a kid, I remember just, normal kid stuff, playground, basketball, all of that. And it really wasn't until I was around 12 years old that God really began to show himself to me, at least from my vantage point. There was a moment in my adult years, I came back to visit my grandmother, and the next door neighbor, she saw me and she said, "Hey, CW, what you doing these days?" I said, "Hey, what's up, Pat? I work in high school ministry in Chicago." And she said, "Oh, I always knew you would be a minister." And I said, "Huh?" Like I didn't think she knew me like that. And she said that when I was little, my grandfather who was also a minister from down south. He would sit me on his leg every evening. And he would read the Bible to me. And she said, I would run up and down the street telling the kids they better turn to Jesus or go to hell. So she said, I just knew God was going to use you that way. And I had no idea that those seeds were planted or that that was a part of my story. But it just so happened to be a part of my sovereign history that God would allow me to go on that trajectory. It may look a lot different than my grandfather's did, but it was really cool to hear that story. But I went on a family trip. I was around 11 and a half, 12 years old to Michigan. And I had never been out the city for an extended amount of time.
Ooh.
And this was the first time I got to spend time with my uncle in Michigan over the summer. And while I was there, I had a cousin who was in school to be a minister. And he was just dropping nuggets on me all summer that I just had no idea that he was doing. He would hang out with me and spend time with me. And one night we were playing Mortal Kombat, and I'll never forget it. He did a fatality on me with Scorpion. Turns head to the skull, blows fire everywhere. And for some reason, it made me say, like, is the world coming to an end? I start thinking about hell and fire, like just stuff you hear as a kid that you don't have any context or view for. And he said, I said, do you think it's coming to an end in 2000? Now, this is 99, and I'm like 11 and a half, 12 years old. And he goes, yeah, I do. Now, he's more, like he believed that at that time, but he said, yeah, I do. And I said, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Terrified. And so he goes, well, do you know Jesus? And I said, yeah, I know Jesus. Everybody know Jesus. You grew up in the hood, you hear Jesus, you know him, and it's what it is. And he goes, no, not know about Jesus. Do you know him personally? And I was so confused by that because I never heard anybody talk about God in that way, or at least I couldn't comprehend it up to that point. And so he begins to share the gospel with me. And he's like, God wants to have a personal relationship with you. It was the oddest thing. Like, how do you have a personal relationship with God? That don't make sense. And so I prayed to receive the Lord. And that was when my journey began. Went back to Cleveland, stepped into my teens, had no real, so, naturally falling in the horny teenager stuff and going through puberty, all of everything that comes with middle school. But God just really began to put me in places and spaces where he could cultivate my faith. I went to Youth for Christ campus life, and a friend of mine got me connected with that. And when I got there, I raised my hand and received the Lord. I had no concept that I knew him already. Like, it's just a process. I thought I had lost him. So I raised my hand, and when I was talking with the leaders in the back, they were like, it sounds like you already know the Lord. And I'm like, yeah, I met him in Michigan, in the summer. I needed to, meet him again. And they began to explain to me and teach me. And over the next decade, I began to build friendships and relationships as they plugged me in the church. I had my ups and downs of figuring out my faith and highs and lows of what it meant to be a teenager and play sports and girls and all of that stuff. But God was still teaching and honing me. And I think another pivotal moment was probably when I was around 16 and a half, 17. I was running cross country. And one of the girls on the cross country team happened to be another friend of youth group. I had finished running and I was cheering the team in as they were finishing up. And this girl said at the end of practice, she said, CW, you're different here than you are at church. Now, she wasn't like dogging me or trying to make fun of me or tell me I was a hypocrite, but I knew exactly what she was saying. Like, at church, you like this young leader, this trajectory of ministry, all of that. But here, you look different, and it cut my heart. Like, I wrestled for days, and I came out on the other side. I said, God, whatever you want to do with my life, I'm down. Like, it's just too much of mental and emotional tension. And I think that's when God began to show me. Now, I still wasn't into like the idea of doing ministry as a profession, but I was very much into like whatever vocation I go into, however I raise my family, the Lord will be a part of those situations or me figuring out how to include him. So I, finished high school and began college, start doing some ministry with Cru. and it was really good. Learned a lot, and I got my first job as a well, not my first job, but my like an actual full-time job as a summer camp counselor through the city mission of Cleveland. We would take kids to camp, and now I'm 19. I got peach fuzz. Like my beautiful beard wasn't there back then. Like this joint is special now, but back then I was struggling, and so I have a little peach fuzz. I had kids in my youth group that I was leading that summer who were literally much younger than me, but I just had to carry myself in a way like that they didn't know it. So like some kids were so shocked to find out Mr. CW is the same age as them at the end of the summer. But I didn't want them to pull my card during the year, so I didn't tell them. Yep. But that was a very formative summer as well, because that was when I first, at the campfire said, God, okay, I get it. I'm willing to do ministry. I see that I'm set apart to do this. I don't know what it looks like yet. I don't want to raise money like my pastors. I don't want to be poor because I grew up, on the fringes of poverty. I ain't trying to go through that. I don't want to be in the hood. Like I had my contingency plans, but the Lord just kept working on me. Did 2 summers with them. And then that fall, the second summer, I began doing classes through Moody Bible Institute, but they were like distance learning classes in Cleveland. So I did a couple classes, and my pastor at the time was like a father to me. He said, hey, we just continued talking about ministry, kept giving me opportunities. And I realized that he went to Moody and the pastor before him went to Moody. Now, I'm a little bit different than they are, my temperaments and things like that, but we very much are very similar in a lot of ways. Mm. And he, just he hooked me up with our scholarship committee, folks who were there for me to help me get through the application process. And so now I get to a point where I'm applying for Moody to go to college, took the visit, loved it. I'm 22 at this point, so I'm a little older college student. And then there is another school that I'm looking at, Lancaster Bible College in Philadelphia, Lancaster, PA. I get accepted to Moody. Great. All ready to go. Now actually I didn't hear anything from Moody. I thought they didn't want me because they said that we would say something by November, but I didn't hear nothing. I'm thinking, no, they don't want me, and that's okay. So I get a call from the admissions counselor, and she goes, hey, CW, you coming to Moody? And I'm like, no, like y'all didn't hit me up. You didn't want me. And she goes, hold up. So she goes and looks for my application. They had forgot to review it. They put my application in the last semester's files and never reviewed it. So she gets a board together, they review it, and they're like, he's cool. He makes the cut. So now I'm in an hour.
Yes. How much time then do you have before you're supposed to then be in school?
It's November, end of November, and school starts in January. So I hit her back and I'm like, that's amazing. I'm excited. I'm ready to go. Who do I talk to about, like the loan department, like colleges have? And she's like, oh, Moody doesn't do that. It's tuition is free. You just pay your room and board, but we don't give loans because we don't want students to go into ministry with debt. So now I'm like, I'm a Black kid from the hood. I ain't got money saved up to go to college. Like, what is we like? I need financial aid. What are we talking about? My mom has 3 other kids. And so I said, I had to think about that. So I applied to Lancaster. I got in immediately with financial aid. I knew people in Philly, like everything. My best friend was going there that same semester. Everything looked like it made sense to go there. Even my biblical hero, Christian hip hop artist, The Ambassador, went there. So it was just like, everything was like, this is it. But in my heart, I knew it wasn't. Like I knew Moody was a school for me. I just couldn't explain it. It felt like it was the right place. So Donnie calls me back about a week later. She's like, hey, I got this presidential scholarship for you, $2,000. I'm like, okay. Now it's about $5,000 at this point to live on campus. So that's a nice dent. So I'm like, maybe this could work. Maybe I could work, clean toilets or something and figure it out. So then board in my church, they're like, we got money for you. So then they throw in, I think, $1,000 or something like that. So now I'm like, The next hurdle was the one that I didn't want to touch. And the reason I didn't want to do ministry, I needed to raise support. I had no desire asking for money. And if you know, depending on what context you grow up in, so like I got friends who are in the white church and they're used to raising money to do missionary stuff and to, do ministry. But because of some of the persecution our ancestors went through, the church didn't really, there were some black missionaries, but we didn't like send it. Like I didn't grow up in a black church, but the black church didn't like send missionaries off with, they didn't raise support. What support was for the black church during persecuted times was collect money, bring it to the church, help people pay their bills, send kids to college. They did outreach in the community. So it just looked a lot different. It wasn't like supporting a missionary to go to China or whatever case, because people was getting their heads knocked off in America. So it's like, we got to take care of each other here. So like the whole structure of like missionary support was not really a black Christian thing in the States. Historically, if you look at it in that way, though there were some missionaries. So for me, there was always this stigma of like, you don't do that. You don't raise support, And I sent out some letters and decided to raise support. And when I knew it was official, so I said, yeah, I would go to Moody. I would raise this last couple $1,000s. When I knew it was real, Craig, was when there was a lady at the end of service who came up to me and she grabbed my hands and she said, I'm believing in you and I'm giving you my money. Do us proud. And she handed me some money. And then there was one last lady. Now she may not even be living now, but she was, mentally handicapped, and it was very visible. And she said, I want to see you go to school. And she gave me $2. Now, the pride in me wanted to give her $2 back and say, no, it's all good. But I feel like the Lord told me, keep this money. And I want you to know I'm going to always provide for you. And that's been my story ever since. Is that I've never been rich, but I've always had just enough where I don't forget the Lord. I can't say I'm starving. That's been my road in ministry as an artist, as a father, as a husband. And, went to college, got through it, learned a lot about how to read God's word and all of that. And along the way, I started rapping and continued doing it. And it just happened to be fruitful in both the cities I was in. And studied communications and Bible. And that's kind of like how the Lord has kind of been using me the last, decade or so.
Awesome, man. I'm super excited, and I'm so blessed to hear that too. Like I can totally reflect too with the whole, the support race thing, and that not, because like I didn't grow up, like me being now in the suburbs and being part of a suburban church. Like I've been here now for almost a decade, and I'm not used to it yet. I didn't grow up in the church at all. Like I grew up in the country, part of a farming community where that a lot of people went, but my family didn't go. And so like that idea, like when I first started going to church and I had to start raising money to do stuff, I was like, my family was like, you don't ask people for anything. You do it yourself.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So I was like, how am I, but I can't. What do you mean I gotta ask people? Oh no. Oh man. Oh, well,
for sure.
Thanks so much for sharing so much of your life. The audience might be wondering the same thing as me. So you said like a snapshot of that is part of your book, and then there's more of that type of stuff, I'm guessing, then in there. For people like me who are interested and gonna go look up after we're done talking here, if they want the book or they want to hear more about the book, where should they go?
Yeah, our website has everything. I mean, you can get the book on Amazon and all of that is totally fine. But THE, like the CWAllen.com, and Allen is spelled ALLEN. But that has my book. We're releasing a short film at the top of May that we just recorded, and the music, all of that stuff is there.
Awesome. I'm super excited. That's my afternoon now.
I'll take the spins.
Well, CW, thank you very much. Thank you for, like, as you said, when you were, late teen, early 20s. You didn't know what God wanted for you for ministry, but you knew it was ministry and you knew he was going to put you where he wanted you. Thank you for being that humble, because I feel like a lot of times we get stuck with our plan and it's like, you gotta work with our plan. Yeah, cool. But you were just like, send me, Lord, send me. And I'm like, wow, amen. That is me too often. It's like, I have my plans. I got my notebook of my plans, but
Well, I think part of it is definitely that young, excited faith of just like, I just love the Lord and I just want to figure it out. And in the last chapter of my book, chapter 11, I talk specifically about purpose and how to find it. What is your purpose? And typically when you look at purpose, there's three areas you look at. One, you're called to know God. That calling never changes. Then you're called to know yourself, which many people don't think is a calling, but like, what things do you do well? What things do you suck at? What do other people say about you? What are your talent, your natural gifts, spiritual gifts? And then what things about your history or your sovereign story, even your ancestors, have made you who you are today? And then the last, after you know yourself, you're called to an assignment. And so I think when folks decipher those three things, it becomes a little bit more simple and easier to navigate, even though sometimes God doesn't lay it in your lap. He gives you options and it's like, just choose one and walk with me. Like, God, come on. But the latter two of those callings change, right? The assignment changes depending on what season of life you're in. Gifts look different in different seasons. How act, who you are to some degree is the same, but changes. Like, my wife has changed me. Being a person who lives and dwells and does ministry here on the South Side has changed me. So my calling has changed in that sense, but me knowing God doesn't ever change. Right. And so, yeah, I think those are, some basic tidbits that I use now as I continue to discern which way I should go or which way I shouldn't.
Well,
Yeah.
once again, CW, thank you so much for being so open with your life and understanding the power that is and the opportunity you have to change lives with that.
Oh, definitely, for sure, bro.
An audience, as always, thank you so much for listening. I couldn't do this without you. Goodbye.